you have Republican members of the Senate who are responsible for the safety of people inside their state, along with the governors, along with the mayor. You have Republican House members in the same position, and yet they're not speaking out. They're not even quietly going to the White House, telling the president enough is enough. Don't tweet about Brian Stelter on a weekend.
Come on, man.
That we crossed the 80,000 threshold. That's like FDR in World War II or after Pearl Harbor. Is he going to tweet about a media critic at the Cleveland Plain Dealer? Like, are you kidding me? Last week he attacked me. Like, and I mean, my God, you've got to be in sad shape if you're focused on me in the middle of the pandemic.
Over 100 tweets.
And look at this. And here he's attacking Sleepy Eyes Chuck Todd.
Oh, my
and then, wow, it's like conspiracy theories. He just blurts out Obamagate.
What is that?
Yeah. The biggest political crime in America. Again,
freaking nut.
Over how many was it? How many did he tweet out yesterday? It was like just some insane number. And Reverend Al, we are literally in the worst crisis since World War II. And again, I don't look at Donald Trump and say, why can't he help himself? Why can't he fix himself? Why can't he be at least competent? Because he has proven time and time again he just can't do it, even though at the beginning we were begging him and pleading with him to do that. You've got to look at his enablers in the United States Senate. 80,000 people dead. They're doing nothing. And if they don't give a damn about Americans' lives, they should look at the polls, because Donald Trump is destroying their careers, destroying the Republican Senate majority, and I say destroying the Republicans' chances to win elections for a generation to come.
And they should lose the elections for a generation to come if they do not have the moral backbone to stand up to this president who is clearly not well. To spend this weekend, to spend the last few days with 80,000 Americans dead. I mean, stop and think about that a minute. 80,000. When we are depression numbers in terms of the economy, and to spend it getting his obsession with you and others that would dare to critique him in the media, which happens to be your job to critique any president, but his obsession with this, he puts his political health above the physical health of American people, and it is co-signed by the Republicans in the Senate and in the House. It is unbelievable where someone's career is over the very lives of the people that they've been sworn to protect and enhance. And I think that we're at a real point in this country where we're going to have to decide, why do we elect people? Do we elect them to preserve the life and the preservation of life of the American people, or we elect them for their own career development and enhancement?
So, Joe, let's take this as seriously as we all are at this point. And I ask you, what could the Republicans do at this point? Who are the Republicans who could make a difference? And what is it that they could do? Why are they so afraid? And, of course, the backdrop of this is, if we all agree that if something was said to this president, if they were able to close in on him, perhaps more lives could be saved.
Well, people always talk about when Arizona conservative icon Barry Goldwater went to the White House and actually told Richard Nixon that it was time to leave. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're even asking here, though I believe America would be far better off, and senior citizens would be far safer, and we could face this crisis far better if Donald Trump did leave office. That's not going to happen. But we're not talking about 50 Republicans here. We're not talking about 30 Republicans. 5 Republicans going over there saying, Mr. President, we're not asking you to leave. We're just asking you to do your job. We have people suffering in our districts. We have people suffering in our states. We have to get people back to work, but your own doctors have been telling you for months now that can't happen without a robust testing regimen where we can test and trace, Mr. President, and you keep refusing to do that. You're the only person in this government that can have a national approach to testing, to tracing, to treating, to doing the sort of things that we need to do to reopen our economies, to save our businesses in our states.
What's stopping them?
Their fear, their cowardice.
We've been talking about this all weekend.
But Caddy, this is the remarkable thing is that by doing nothing, by letting the president be reckless, by tweeting like some just deeply disturbed senior citizen. I mean, they're just hurting themselves even more. There's no surviving this for so many of these Republican senators. There were articles all weekend where Republican senators and Republican consultants were saying that they're going to get washed away in a landslide, swept away in a tidal wave this fall in the elections. And yet they're doing nothing. It seems to me, at least take a chance. Tell the president, 5 Republicans, we've got a working majority here. Would love to work with you, but if you're going to just keep tweeting and wasting your time all weekend, we're going to get to work with Democrats and try to save lives.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think there was an opportunity here for a group of Republicans from the states that are vulnerable, from Arizona, to go to President Trump and say, this is what it will mean for you if we lose in our states. If we lose the Senate majority, this is what it means in terms of your agenda going into a second term. And we know that they're worried, and we know that they are expressing this to each other, but they've got to get that message to the president if they want to hang on to the Senate. And I've spoken to people who used to work in the Trump administration who say, look, you target your message to Trump around the key objectives that he has. His key objective is making sure that he wins Michigan, making sure that he wins Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, hanging on to Florida, keeping Arizona. That's the way you talk to Trump. You put it in very transactional terms. He's a very transactional president, and he works that way. So there's a transaction to be done here. We need to keep these Senate seats. You need to do this or not do this, not send out so many tweets in order that we do that, and start with less ambivalence on testing. And there's a window there. I don't know why they're not doing it, because otherwise, like you said, Joe, the Senate looks like it's going to go.
Yeah, and by the way, not just screwing up testing, Mika, but one thing after another, setting up White House guidelines, working with his doctors, setting up White House guidelines, and the next day undercutting those White House guidelines, firing for political reasons. A guy who's been working in the government for years, getting ready for this pandemic, to get the vaccine ready, firing him because he didn't like the fact that the guy didn't kowtow to him. Maybe, again, you just one thing after another. Every day, it's the president acting more and more reckless. And every day, it's the Republicans going deeper under the ground.
What is their bar?
And every day, it's more and more Americans dying. Again, we're over 80,000. Over 80,000 dead. And it's not slowing down.
Still ahead on Morning Joe, the Republican governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, is our guest. Plus, Richard Haas's brief introduction to the world. His new book is finally here, and talk about timing. We'll take a deep dive on the global challenges increasingly playing out here at home. Also, as a top strategist to Mayor Pete, Liz Smith spent months trying to beat Joe Biden. Now that Biden's the apparent nominee, she's got a plan to help him win, and she'll explain that just ahead. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.